174 hours later, after doing some drilling, machining, and everything like that, I'm trying to replicate this stud. Obviously, you can see the new one over here, right? I ordered these, but I made it try to work the same as here. Got some little Extreme super duty high strength thread locker on this nut, which I had to machine away some. I didn't want to even touch this thing with the grinder, but I had to just clearance this bolt so I could make this stud be as straight as possible. Of course, doesn't look 100% straight, but I think we can make it work with that. I'm about to mate it up with the catalytic converter where this down pipe is going to link into. But like I said, I got thread locker on here, thread locker on this one, machined it away a little bit just to make it clear. Made it about the same height. Made this nut right here about the same height. Hold on, let me see if I can get to, there we go. See how this one's about the same height as this one over here. I do that because when the catalytic converter mounting plate rests on there, it's going to go down to about there and rest on there, and it's going to push the catalytic converter seal the pipe onto that little donut right there. Obviously you don't want to say, we don't need these nuts here, because they have to be separated so much, because if you torque it down too much, it will crush this little donut right here, right? So once that's like 50 bucks just for this little thing. It's like a little, I don't know, lead soft. It's kind of soft. You can nick it up. It almost feels like clay sometimes, but it pushes down and makes that seal for the exhaust. So that's what I've been working on here, and that's why I've been taking such great pains to completely drill this out. As you can see, my mess down here, I'm gonna have to clean all these bolts off again. You know, working with some grinding tools, cutting tools, had to cut the old stud off. I got it, I think I threw it away already, but just to get this bolt hole out and just to get this new stud that I just got in the mail today to fit on there as closely to this one as I can. Now, that's the reason why we only had one exhaust manifold on there. Why I haven't put the dipstick tube on, because it mounts to one of the studs on the other side to the exhaust manifold there. Went ahead and touched her up with a little bit more of that silver paint, because I was touching with, I wipe my hands off now, but I was touching it. I got grease on it and probably thinking like, it doesn't matter, it's an engine, it's gonna get greasy again. But you know, when I put this thing in here, I wanted to look as pristine, and actually, because I had machined off some right there, I wanted to make sure that I respray painted that so it didn't cause extra rust. You know, it's already, I didn't want to touch it because it weakens, because this right here is like a support for during engine operation while the engine's vibrating, for that thing not to get weak and break off and stuff like that. I don't think it's going to break off, but I don't want the rust to start eating away at it faster than it normally would. So I went ahead and made sure that I re-protected it by putting spray paint on there. So I figured I'd go ahead and touch it up. So that's why I did that. Anyway, the upper intake over here, I cleaned her off a little bit. Got in there with a Q-tip, you know, some cleaning supplies. I tried to mind not getting inside the intake, because I think there's a, yeah, right here. I mean, if you read it, it says do not clean the inside of the throttle body, basically, in the intake, because it has a protective coating on the throttle plate right here. Let me get you down in here. See that little thing that looks like two little bolts right there holding on the throttle plate? So I made sure I didn't get any cleaner in there and like clean up that a whole bunch. I just, you know, cleaned around it, you know, just to get the grime off there. You know, you get the dirt out there, it's just easier to work on when you don't have to worry about, you know, grease, when you're trying to handle stuff and you get grease everywhere. And plus it makes it look nice. So why not? You know, I'm waiting on the stud to get in. I figured I'd take care of some of that boring work that not everybody likes to do, but it's always good to do. That awesome kit that I got, I swear, next time if they got one for an LS engine, I'm probably gonna pick it up, because it was like 40 bucks. It had all the seals and gaskets pretty much that I need, minus the rear main seal. It didn't have a rear seal, but that's okay. They had the gasket for the throttle body, so when I took it out, I was able to, that's a new gasket. You can see it kind of barely poking out right there. There you go. It's like blue in color, sort of. And also the air intake gaskets. And they just happen to be a nice little color of blue. I swear, I'm not picking these colors. That's just the way they come. ladies and gentlemen, here we are. We got it all mounted up on the chain, got it off the engine stand, getting ready to torque down these flex plate bolts right there. As you can see, there's an odd one out. That one should be able to work. Kind of check the clearance to make sure that this one isn't going to poke out too much. There is a certain amount of clearance that these need to have. You don't want this thing poking out like out here, you know, for the torque converter and stuff like that. So we'll have that to where it won't impede the operation of the torque converter and the flex plate. I'm about to torque these down to 60 foot-pounds because it calls for between 54 and 64 foot-pounds. Got these linked up by the engine mounts, taking care of having some padding for the valve cover. I'm trying to get the pressure, most of the pressure on the top down and not the side, because I don't want to disrupt this new gasket, an RTV that I just put in here recently. It's had plenty of time the RTVs have plenty of time to cure. I'm touching it's pretty spongy, not sticky at all. It looks like the valve cover gasket's still good. Most of the pressure is pushing down on it, not to the side of it. And giving this thing a few shakes, and it doesn't seem to be popping loose or adjusting at all. So I don't know. I'm always really optimistic. I think everything's going to work out perfect. You know, but if it doesn't, I got plans for that. I got a million ways that I can adjust. I got different things in my repertoire, different things in my tool bag that I know that I can use to get this thing in there successfully and safely. So without further ado, let's do that. All right, ladies and gentlemen. All right, aside from my trunks I got sitting over here, we have a truck here to put this lovely engine into, as you saw earlier. You saw me do this in a previous video with stuff still masked off. I got stuff holding torque converter while I transported it over here. Got the e-brake on, got the wheels chocked. Ready to drop this sucker in here. Got the bushings off of it last night. Well, one of them that was already on there. There's one over there, I took it off. So go ahead and put it on the engine so it'd make it easier for me to wrap my chains around the engine mounts without fear of them slipping off. I'm a little bit more confident with that than just the straight engine mount, because otherwise they could have just went and just flipped right off, right? We don't want that, because a lot of injury could be sustained through that. Now, I still got some stuff on the lines. No lines are in the way. All the stuff is loomed and pulled back. It's ready. I'm telling you, this thing's ready to drop in. I've been waiting a long time to do this. But I'm gonna go ahead and set the camera down and show you this in time lapse. So coming onto the truck here, you can see I got this bushing mount nut right here on there, a little bit loose. After I stabbed it, I just now getting putting the nuts on there. I'm going to torque it down to 53 foot-pounds because it calls between 52 and 54. So I'm going to go right there in the middle and go 53 foot-pounds with my torque wrench over here. See, right here is the other one on the other side, directly across from each other. Okay, now my torque goes down to 53. All right, so here being the transmission, there's some mount bolts that go back here that I still need to put on. You can see I already got one up here, not torqued down. They should go to 33 foot-pounds. That's like right there in the middle of the torque specification. But I need to put one in here, one in there. Basically, I need to put one, a smaller or longer, skinnier one through here. I need to put some on to secure the inspection plate. Basically, all along the transmission here, inspection plate bolts. And then, of course, on the other side, I only got 3 bolts in the transmission right now. Now, what I was talking about earlier, I don't know if you guys can see that in there. You see that little nub sticking up right there? That is the torque converter stud. That's the torque converter that's behind the flex plate. That's the stud for it. That's going through the screw hole on the flex plate. The flex plate being this little guy right here with teeth. The way that I lined this up when I was stabbing it, when I was putting the engine in, was I got the engine just close enough, not on the mounts yet, or not on the actual engine mounts yet, but I got it close enough to where the flex plate was kind of almost resting on the studs, not actually pushing too hard against the studs. And then when I could see the studs, I would take, you got to be careful when you do it this way so you don't bend the inspection cover, but I took a pry bar and was lightly prying, or to turn the crank or to turn the flywheel so that I could line that stud up with the flex plate. Now there's another way to do it if you got two people, you would have someone turning the crank and let them know when to stop so that you could have that bolt lined up, or that stud lined up with the hole. Now once you have that lined up with the hole, you need to come over here and check and make sure that there's another stud over here that's lined up with the hole as well. Now the reason why I say that is because sometimes there's this one hole in the flywheel, or in this case flex plate because it's automatic transmission. There's a hole in here that looks like a screw hole, but it is not a screw hole. And you can kind of tell because on the flex plate there'll be this hole that does not have a wear pattern where a nut used to be, and then you know that's not the real hole. This one did have the wear pattern, and it lined up here, and then I checked over here at this inspection cover and I could see another stud poking through the hole, so you know it's pretty much lined up. Since I was just by myself, I was using the pry bar technique where I was kind of prying this way and pushing the flywheel or the flex plate down. You got to be careful not to mar up these teeth, because this is what the starter uses to start your engine every time. It grabs onto these teeth, and if you wear these out, it could start missing the teeth and like damaging the starter or the flex plate further. So that's the reason why it's kind of ill-advised to do that. And not only that, it's prone to, when you're pushing against this part of the bell housing and the inspection cover, this piece right here can flex pretty well, and a lot of times people will crack the bell housing right here because they're prying too hard. They're prying too hard this way, and it cracks the bell housing. So you got to be mindful of that. As long as you're cognizant of that and you're not going crazy on the bell housing or on the flex plate itself, you should be good to go. But as a main point here, those are just some precautions. The main point here, as long as that stud lines up with the hole with the wear pattern on the flex plate on this side, and you check over here and it's lined up on that side, then you're good to go. If you notice that the hole's lined up but the stud is going through, you're probably not lined up. So once you get that lined up, you kind of push the engine in a little bit until it seats properly. And once it seats properly, then you can start putting the bell housing bolts on. Some of the techniques helped me is, you got to have a transmission jack under here, and then be jacking up the transmission, because the engine's not going to go in straight, exactly lined up perfectly with the transmission, so you got to finagle some things. Either jack up the transmission a little bit, not too much to where it's pushing against these fire blankets up here or crushing any wires, but just enough so that you can line up the holes right here, and also so you can line up those bolts for the torque converter and flex plate, right? And then ultimately, once you get that in, then you can work with the mounts. Now, because I decided to use the bushing, which I kind of knew this was going to happen, but I figured I was just going to work with it when I got there. Since I had this bushing on the mount itself, when I put it in here, I already know that it's going to be kind of hard to get it on the frame rail mount here. So what I had to do is I loosened up the nuts that are on top over here. You can kind of see it up there. I had to loosen up these nuts just a little bit to get a little wiggle, so that way I could sort of lightly pry the studs into the holes right here where they go. So I did that, and I loosened up these. This is the transmission right here, And right back here is the trans mount bolt right here. Yeah, there you go. Those two trans mount bolts, they're in the center of the cross member here for the transmission. And all I did was I just loosened those up. I'm about to tighten them back up. But I loosened them up just a little bit, left them on there. Don't take them completely off, but I left them on there so that gives the transmission a little bit extra wiggle. To get that, it's always like a half an inch. It's always like a half an inch that keeps you from getting your engine mounted and stuff like that. And those, loosening up those little things right there, not taking them completely off, but loosening them up will give you that little extra bit of play. What we're gonna do, sorry, I know it's a lot of talking, but it kind of explains to you the process because time lapse only tells so much of a story. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put the rest of these bolts in here. Not really any way to fast forward through that, but you know, I can show you that and putting on some connectors, which I'll show you up top. It's really just plugging in wires. I'll time lapse that one so you can just kind of see it come together. All right, so what I was saying here, is I'm gonna chase some of these wires down. Obviously, I know where this coil goes. You know, we're gonna put her back up here on the valve cover. I just don't want to break it because these little tiny bolts and everything on here, I didn't want to break it off while I was putting it in, so I just took it off, laid it over here, took out some of the spark plug wires. I know these red ones, these go to the injectors, so that's probably the injector for 1, 3, and 5 cylinder there. That's just me just looking at it. I got the manual and it's got a wiring schematic and all that good stuff, and I got pictures and where the wires were hooked up. What I didn't do, and it's time consuming, but what I didn't do, what a lot of people do, is they'll number. Like, I was changing out these injectors anyway, but what I could have done was number this like 1 and then number this wire 1, right? A lot of this stuff I already know where this goes. You know, I know where this is the upstream oxygen sensor, one of the, because there's like 3 of them on this vehicle. Then we got some grounds over here that most likely go to the AC compressor and the alternator, I'm pretty sure. I know that's a throttle cable, I know that. And then I can tell that these are injectors, for injectors right here. I haven't dug into this yet, but I can kind of already see where all this stuff goes. I know this, once I get the upper intake put on, I know that that goes on the side of it. There's a plate that mounts on there and then it slides up in there. And then there's a bolt. No, the bolt's already in there, but anyway, you'll see how that kind of goes in. I'm just glad that I cleaned up like with the loom, because before I would like be grabbing this and it'd be crunching and just stuff would be falling everywhere. I knew that was going to be something that I had to address, and I'm so glad that I did. If anything, just to make it easier to work on, and so far it's working to that effort, towards that effort. Now that sounds like the dinner bell, but it's not dinner time yet. I'm gonna go ahead after I put these, finishing up torquing down those bushings over there. I'm gonna put the rest of the trans bolts in, because I want to make sure that I got all the bolts in the trans housing, because I don't want extra stress on the transmission with only a couple bolts in there. So I want to have all of them in there, so the bell housing will be that much stronger the more bolts you put in there. And then that way I can also torque them down, and then I'll go ahead and torque up some of these bushings. And then the last I'll do as far as torquing down that setup, the powertrain down there, is I'm gonna torque up the transmission mount bolts, and then I can start working on the upper intake and then the coils, and then start plugging stuff back in. So that's kind of my plan right now. And then of course we'll get to all these, you know, alternator and drive accessories, but I'm not gonna put them in right now because it'll make it harder to work on and finagle wires back and forth with that on there. And I can wait on that stuff. We're not cranking it up right this second, because obviously we need to get stuff torqued down and plugged in. All right, so with that said, we'll get to it. notice this right here. Notice that these two bolts right here, they look same, right? They got the same thread and everything, you know, they match up pretty well. They got the same exact thread, looks like the almost exact same bolt, but they are not. Looks can be deceiving. The reason why I'm saying that is because there are two bolts. I'll show you where they go here in a second and what the difference is. Notice you line them up here and they look almost identical, except see that extra little space, how much a little bit longer than they are than this one, right? They'll both fit in the same hole. However, this longer one right here goes in a special spot. This is the regular, they both go in the transmission bell housing, but this one will go on the top ones, the top bolts over here on the transmission, like from here to there. There's like 3 of them, and then there's 2 that go on the sides that go in. This big one is going to go in this direction into where the peg for the transmission. I'll show you that here in just a second. All these other transmission mount bolts on the top go into the engine like that. All right, I'm gonna bring you around and I'll show you what I'm talking about. All right, so over here, through my super secret inspection cover, notice the difference, okay? So this longer bolt is gonna go into this hole and then mount to the transmission that way. This smaller bolt, the smaller one, is going to go in here and mount to the engine like that. Okay, that's the difference. Don't mix those up, which I've done quite a bit before, but it's easy to mix up because they look really the same and you think they're all the same bolt, but they're not. So when in doubt, just measure them, make sure you got the same thing, because 2 things will happen. All right, if you put this extra long bolt in to try to screw it into the engine instead of where the peg where it does go, then the engine will not properly seat against the transmission. There'll be a little tiny bit of a gap, just a little bit of a gap that you probably won't see because the inspection cover, you know, look like it's fully mated to the transmission, but it's not, and it could cause the bell housing to crack and maybe even possibly the torque converter to get unseated from the transmission oil pump. You know, we could go down the laundry list of things, but I mean, it'll cause some issues. So just make sure, just a little FYI, make sure that you get the right bolts in the right holes. All right. So there's another one, like I showed you on the right side of the engine and transmission, and it's the same setup on the left side. So you need to do the same thing. There is another long bolt that goes in where the peg goes, and then the short bolt to go up top into the from the transmission into the engine. All right. So let's keep going. Saw in today's video the stabbing of the engine. It took about an hour or 2 to get it fully stabbed. I had to readjust and everything, and yeah, I forgot to put the inspection cover on between the engine and transmission, so I had to readjust that. You didn't see that in time lapse, but you know, just going through those growing pains, you don't have to see me running up and down, you know, on top of the truck, underneath the truck, aligning the torque converter bolts with the flex plate, and then the transmission mount, transmission bell housing with the engine block. So you didn't have to, I didn't have to move you around and see that. Kind of explained a little bit after about, you know, lining up the studs of the torque converter. We saw that. So all that happened, getting it stabbed in about an hour or 2. That's actually kind of long. You know, I used to, back in my heyday, maybe like, you know, 20 years ago, something like that. I'm kind of speaking my age right now, but You know, I used to be able to do this in like, 30 minutes or so and have this thing started by the end of the day. But I ain't got a shop full of tools, and I don't do this every single day. I'm kind of just getting back into it. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. That's my excuse. Anyway, but we got it up to there. Also, as you saw right there, what I was doing is putting on the upper intake. I was putting on some of the drive accessories, such as the AC condenser and also the alternator or generator, whatever you want to call it. Generators and diesel, but you can call it alternator generator. Put on some of the wiring, chasing some wires. I kind of just, be honest with you, I didn't even have to look at the book for, I could just look and I see the connector and I know exactly what it goes to. Other little tiny little hoses and stuff I'm just trying to work with routing it the right way so the hoses don't get burned up and the looms don't get burned off because it's too close to the block or the exhaust manifold, etc. So I'm working on that. This is the time where we start to forget about the important stuff, like the grounds that will bite you in the end when you go to start this up and you're chasing all these wires trying to figure out maybe like if your engine's not starting yet at all and you're wondering why you're not getting enough voltage somewhere or why you're getting these error codes. Well, it's probably because you don't have a proper ground somewhere or you don't have it hooked up at all. Pretty soon we're going to get to putting the belts on, and that startup is coming up pretty quick. My first attempt at starting up is going to be coming up pretty quick. I can't guarantee it'll be in the next video, but very well could be. If you liked what you saw in today's video today, give us a like, share, or subscribe. If you have any questions about today's video, don't forget to leave a comment. I will read that, I promise you. But for now, I'll see you later.